Okay, so we've got a new episode of Legends and Leaders, and today it's great to have Andreas here. You are behind an incredible company in the delivery space, changing the way that products are delivered to you faster, smoother, and just automated. I mean, automated delivery is just not even become a reality yet, but it's so close. And I mean, you guys are making it something that could completely change the way delivery is done. It's very exciting. The system looks beautiful. It's really comprehensive. So I'm excited to have you here and to get into your story.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great to have you. So, just kind of going back into, your origins, like were you always obsessed with technology, with entrepreneurship? How did you kind of think about this idea and, what led to this company?
Yeah, I grew up in Athens, Greece. I remember sort of being really young and looking at the Parthenon from our from the window of my room, and I thought, I was thinking, is it possible that I get to participate in something that may last for generations and be here, like as a contribution to civilization? So I think I had that bug from very early on in my mind, and then I, was really obsessed with technology, wanted to become an inventor. I went into mechanical and aeronautics engineering, and that's how I got started. I soon after I invented my first piece of technology, which became my first company in a completely different space. And then around 2010, I started asking the question: has something changed in the technology landscape that would allow us to build a flying car differently? And I had this concept of like massively distributed propulsion in my mind, as perhaps like the enabler. And then I started looking at what's happening on the web, etc. And I discovered that there was a DIY drone movement that had just started, and people were building small quadcopters, multi-rotors, trying to figure out how to get them to be autonomous and go from A to B, like perhaps collect footage without a human sort of flying it. And when I saw this, I thought this is going to change how the world works. It's going to change how we do transportation of goods, and it's going to change how we transport people. So that really was the origin thought. As I started digging into the space, I got really obsessed with logistics and how the world is already transporting small items, and we use this antiquated technology to do it. And like to give you an example, right? Today, just between DoorDash and Uber Eats, there's like 14 million deliveries, instant deliveries that are done every day. And these are small packages, typically below 5 pounds, and we use 2-ton cars to do these, like driven by humans. Kind of crazy. So I started looking at that and I thought, okay, this could be something that really changes how the world works. And if we get it right, it could create a leapfrog scenario in the same way that we saw, mobile telephony completely changing, cellular networks completely changing communications. Maybe these can change one of the most fundamental things that we do every day, which is transport things from A to B. So that was really the origin story. We called the company Matternet because we wanted to create a network for matter that works as an equivalent to the internet. So it's decentralized, peer-to-peer, bidirectional, asynchronous, and that's really the vision of the company, to build the technology layers to allow these types of networks to exist anywhere in the world, including in places that never had other types of transportation systems, don't have road infrastructure, etc. So that's really the journey that we're on.
So, how did you guys develop this system? Like, how long did it take? How did you like think about even what's needed? Because it's like inventing something entirely new. You need to build the infrastructure. You need to build the drones themselves, like how they correspond, how they interact with people. There's a lot of different pieces here. It's like building the car of the sky.
Yeah. This is, I think, one of the most interesting, most important fundamental sort of thoughts formatted, like at the foundation of this project, this idea. We really wrapped our heads around the concept that it's not just about building a flying vehicle that can aviate and navigate safely over people, long distances, autonomously, etc. But it's really about building a whole system that will allow the world to really adopt it. The world is not built for drone delivery. So we really thought, okay, how can you have this technology be ubiquitous and people without skill and specific expertise being able to access that system? And we looked back at the history of computing and how like that became ubiquitous. And of course, the thing you realize early on is that you really have to lower the barrier to entry for using this type of system for people that are non-experts, right? And then it really can sort of catch fire. So at the inception of the company, we figured that there are like three key ingredients to creating a system that can work at scale. The first, of course, is the flying vehicle. And you need to have a flying vehicle that's autonomous. So you don't have people running it, it runs itself. The second key thing is ground infrastructure that allows these vehicles to fulfill their energy needs, either charge or swap batteries, and crucially, accept and deliver packages. So you need to have some type of system that the non-expert user can really sort of insert the package into the system. We call this thing a portal. And the third key thing is like build a software layer that allows this type of infrastructure to run at massive scale. To give you a sense of scale, our objective is to get to 1 million deliveries per day by 2032.
Wow.
So we want our technology to be able to deliver 1 million packages a day by 2032. In order to do that, we probably need something between 40 and 50,000 aircraft flying in the sky autonomously around the world, right? And in order to coordinate, those assets both in the sky and on the ground, you need to have this operating system, right? Early on, we called it Matternet OS. Now we call it our platform, on which really, all assets have their like digital equivalent, and their status is in the system. You're able to coordinate. You're able to route assets when needed. You're able to see weather. You're able to see air traffic, etc. So, from the very, very early days on Matternet, we figured that these were like three key ingredients that we need to figure out. It turns out that this is really what's needed to solve the problem. So we had this fundamental insight that was very, very valuable. And of course, as you start executing in each one of these three assets, you realize, layers of complexity that you need to solve for. And this is where like engineering and execution comes in.
So how long did it take you, Andreas, to build out this system and actually get it workable? Was this like multiple years of development, and did it go smooth when you launched initially?
The very first experiments we were running back in 2012 were with off-the-shelf technology, just trying to understand how we can use somebody else's technology to do autonomous missions. I remember the very first pilot we've done in Haiti in 2012 was run on a off-the-shelf octocopter multi-rotor that we had bought from this German company, and that allowed us to really start wrapping our heads around, okay, how does this thing work? How do we develop something that's robust? And actually, the first 2 or 3 years of the company, I really spent a lot of time trying to see, can we get robust technology, drone technology, from somebody that we can use, right? The answer to that turned out to be no. So I realized that, okay, we really need to build our own. And then we started building, late 2013. And then by mid 2014, we had our first MVP, which in fact we flew our first autonomous missions with in Bhutan, in the Himalayas. So our very first pilot, that was like with a commercial sponsor. In that case, was with the World Health Organization, was in Bhutan, and we used our very first version of our system to do autonomous missions that were up to 20 kilometers long, right? So transporting blood samples and medicine between locations inside the Bhutanese sort of healthcare system. Bhutan is a very mountainous country in the Himalayas. We could show that you can transport something by a drone in like 15 to 20 minutes. In the summer, in good conditions, it would take you 2 to 3 hours. In the winter, when roads close, it could be like 10 plus hours, and sometimes you don't actually make it, right? So it took us about, I would say, less than a year, maybe 9 months to get to our first MVP. And that was a system that we could, select a destination, an origin and destination. We had a cloud platform that was able to generate a route by taking terrain and obstacles into account. We were able to generate that mission in our cloud system, and then we could initiate this from a mobile device. That instruction go to our cloud system, and from then down to our aircraft that connected to the cloud system through cellular connection. And then the aircraft got that mission plan from our cloud system and then executed the mission autonomously. So it's pretty impressive when I think about it, that like it took us, 6 to 9 months to get to an MVP. And then of course, then came the second iteration, the third iteration. We launched our first aircraft, we call it Matternet 1, in 2015. We deployed it in Switzerland. We got our first authorizations to fly long autonomous missions. We call this in our industry beyond visual line of sight operations. So we don't have eyes on the aircraft or the airspace that the aircraft is in. So we flew our first long autonomous missions in Switzerland in 2015. And then in 2016, we started on our next program. We call it Matternet M2, which is our current system. Matternet 2 is today the only type certified system in the world. Type certification is something that the FAA grants to aircraft manufacturers, and we're the only ones that have gotten to this level of airworthiness certification. And then also in 2016, we launched our first station to really complement, because I mentioned the two pieces, aircraft and cloud system, but station, the ground infrastructure, took us a bit longer to be able to start really executing on that. In 2016, we released our version 1 station that did battery swap, accepted payloads, and uploaded into the aircraft. And then in 2019, we launched our current station, which allows us to do to handle ground logistics in a much more sophisticated way.
Why do we not see kind of drone delivery like kind of taking over? Like when you look at your system, it seems like it's great. It's ready to go. It functions well. You've done a lot of tests. You just described some of the testing you've been doing. What's kind of held it back? Is it a regulation problem? Is it a financial problem? There's not enough funding to build it out. Like what's kind of been the issue?
Yeah, it's been regulation until very recently. It's been regulation. So anything that flies, let's take the US as an example, in the national airspace system, is regulated at the federal level by the FAA. And until a couple of years ago, you could not fly drones autonomously for long distances. You had to maintain a visual line of sight to them. And that really limited the projects that we could run for drone delivery here in the US. We ran some operations that were, facilities up to a mile apart, and there are some applications actually within healthcare where this is viable. But you can't actually do massive scale, and massive scale again happens in home delivery, right? So again, to use the example before, just like food delivery, over 10 million deliveries a day in the US, when someone gets in a car and goes, picks up somebody's food and takes it to somebody's home, right? So to do this with drones, we needed to have this new piece of regulation that allowed us to operate beyond visual line of sight, which means long distances autonomously. So this just happened. It happened a few months ago, and now we're seeing projects, being created around the US. They say that the future is here, but it's not equally distributed. This is definitely true for drones. For example, if you were to visit Mountain View, which is where our headquarters are in Silicon Valley, if you live within 5 miles of our office, you can go on our website, order something like a chocolate or coffee or something, and we can deliver it to you via drone to your home, right? So the future is definitely here. And, to give you a sense of the industry, today there's probably a couple of thousand drone deliveries per day happening in the US,
Okay.
right? 1 to 2,000 drone deliveries a day. I think by 2030, that number is going to be 3 to 5 million. So now all the pieces are here from a regulatory perspective, and now capital is starting to realize that too. that we're going to see this massive inflection point. And I think the next 4 to 5 years, we'll just see again, that reality coming into effect, that you're going to have these really small autonomous robots transporting packages versus people doing it with cars.
So, I mean, part of what Amazon was talking about with like Prime Air initially was that like 95% of their packages would make sense for Prime Air, right? And you see today, like I mean, I think the most widely used autonomous delivery system right now is these like kind of sidewalk robots that drive around, right? You would think that drones are going to be faster, and if they can cover, 95% of packages people are buying, they're going to become, potentially the primary way for delivery to happen. Do you see this as like a partnership kind of, model to scale? Like you need to partner with leading retailers, or does this become a platform where you're almost like an Instacart?
Yeah, I think different companies have different playbooks on that. Matternet's playbook is that we want to be a partner to the people who really need this. So to some of the platforms that, like Instacart, for instance, that people go and shop, we want to be their drone delivery partner, and that's how we built our tech stack to be able to integrate with people like them and Uber Eats, and also directly with restaurants, directly with retailers, right? Like Target, like Walmart, like Amazon. Yes, the vast majority of e-commerce packages are £5 or less. And drones are going to be really good for when speed matters. That's really their unique selling proposition. You have an aircraft that is flying typically at a speed of over 40 miles per hour. It doesn't get stuck in traffic, and you can cover a distance of maybe, let's call it 5 miles, like in a city. Let's say the city of LA or Miami, right? 5 miles is a long distance. It may take you an hour to get there. With a drone, it's 5 to 7 minutes, right?
Right.
So that's really amazing. And so when speed matters, we're really going to see these systems being adopted. So for instant delivery, food delivery, it's a no-brainer, right? And then over time, as these systems scale, because they have very high degrees of autonomy, and at least in our case, low costs of ground infrastructure, you end up with unit economics that are way less than what we the cost that we have to be today, right? So, maybe at some point in the future, when you order your Uber Eats order, instead of like a hidden cost in there of like $6 to $8 for your delivery, maybe that cost could be, I don't know, $2 or $3, right? And that's really going to change. And if you imagine what happened with the internet, right? Let's say the adoption of email, it really became an amazing thing, and we see it with messaging now. Once like the incremental cost of sending one more email or one more message came close to zero, this could actually happen with drone delivery as they scale. So if you look at the physics of what does it take to operate these systems at scale, the energy that they use, and the metals that you need to use, and the batteries, etc., right? The cost per delivery at scale, for an urban environment may be like less than $1 per delivery, right? So it has this promise of creating a system that will completely change how reality works, how we do one of the most fundamental things that we do every day, sending things from A to B for the small packages. When you think about someone like Amazon, for sure there will be, ground systems, and I think even manned ground systems, right? So because someone may buy a TV, or someone may buy something sort of big and bulky. And I don't see these actually migrating to the lower part of the airspace. I think the lightweight stuff will migrate, because this is where ground transportation actually doesn't make sense. And for drones, really, we want to keep them in the background of people's perception. We want small aircraft that are very quiet and don't invade anybody's like privacy, or don't create annoyance for communities. So, in our view of the world, these systems are going to be small. They're going to be serving urban and suburban environments, transporting small packages, and they will be complementing, ground infrastructure. I'm not a massive believer in sidewalk robots, because they compete with, like, they require very precious real estate. Uh, Most of like sidewalks, like we need them for humans. I think this is about actually giving more space to humans rather than less. And again, imagine even if we took like 10% out of those deliveries out, like if we did like 1 million deliveries a day, that today are done by car, imagine the secondary effects of that, right? So the cars that we get off the road, the time that we save people that they want to get from A to B, right? The pollution that we eliminate, right? So it's really, I think an amazing benefit to society, and we're going to see it happening over the next few years as this technology scales.
Do you think that there's going to be like kind of bases needed at certain malls, or is it like something that restaurants are going to have a different size of a base and they just someone goes outside and puts it on the drone and goes from there? Like it's more on private property, like it's not going to rely as much on like government needed base, like on government land kind of bases, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think it's certainly going to be on private property, and for the most part, the commercial applications. And different again companies have different ways of tackling that problem. Matternet has a unique way of tackling that problem with our ground infrastructure. We call them stations. We build them in a way that they can be highly distributed. So, instead of thinking of hubs where, you have like a drone port somewhere and you need like special real estate for it, we're thinking about, you hiding, if you wish, our assets in real estate that is not, that you can easily use, right? And in the current system that you can see on our website, for instance, you can see that there's an asset called the station. Someone like can do a few steps outside the restaurant or retailer and just like deposit the package into the station, and then the drone takes it from there automatically. In our next gen system, without revealing too much, you may actually not need to even go outside the building, right? So we're trying to remove even more friction. But I think that's like in our vision of the world, these assets will be distributed. Capacity will be closer to where demand is, right? Close to merchants and high throughput merchants. And then it's going to be really easy for, people on the one side to input packages into the system, and really easy on the other side for people to receive them.
So, just like the last question, like, what does the world look like when this starts to become something that really changes delivery? Like, how much of a better experience are people going to have? How different is delivery going to be?
Yeah, this takes no like the the first part of that answer like takes no imagination because you can really come and see it today,
Yeah.
right? So if you were to, let's say, be in Mountain View and get one of our deliveries, the first thing that you experience is surprise. Like I just ordered, this thing is already here,
Wow.
right? Then for people that get it for the first time, there's a little bit of delight because there is something magical around a flying vehicle coming, like a package coming from the sky. When we serve suburban homes, we don't land. We come down above their property at a designated spot, and we teardrop something gently to the ground. So it feels like a very natural, no humans like involved experience. And when it comes to things like what happens to your food, or the package that you're transporting, in Switzerland, for instance, we're transporting very valuable packages, with chemotherapy treatment, etc. So it's really important that you know where your package always is. You can always see it, and then there's no humans touching it in between. So from, let's say, the restaurant to the home, there's no human interaction, and that actually makes it, once you realize that, you say, that's actually a much better way of getting my package. Now, as we see these things scale, I think we're going to be used to a much superior customer experience. Again, around speed, around no one touching our food, for instance, and things being really simple. It's really about simplicity in the end. Also, we're going to see in our communities much less traffic around neighborhoods where restaurants are, right? Because you won't have people going in with cars trying to pick up and parking randomly on the street, etc. We're going to see much less traffic in our downtown areas. For people doing these package deliveries, we're going to see traffic only for people commuting, which is, I think, the way that roads were initially designed to be. So we're going to hopefully see some decongestion. And then on the other side, as we see like tens of thousands of drones like taking off in the US, at least in our case, and I think the best way to implement those systems is that you make them invisible and inaudible, right? So when you don't actually get a delivery, you should not notice those things existing. And we're designing systems that are sort of adhering to these guidelines. So you shouldn't be able to see or hear a system unless you're really looking for it.
I mean, I love the vision. I think it's so cool, and it's amazing what you guys have built so far with this. And it's like right at this point where it's about to really change the world, and already is, it's impacting people, but it's the scale is coming. So it's quite exciting to see that. And I appreciate you taking the time and coming on and sharing what you're building.